The carriage wheels did not merely turn, they groaned, a rhythmic protest against the suffocating silence of the Greymont estate. Inside, Dominic Voss, the Duke of Stirling, sat encased in a silence of his own making. For 6 years he had been a man of shadows, a phantom haunting the ballrooms of London, a man who had traded his soul for the cold comfort of a bottle and the mindless repetition of high society. But today, the city's fog had been replaced by the biting, honest chill of the countryside. As the skeletal oaks of the drive clawed at the bray sky, Dominic felt a familiar constriction in his chest, the Stirling choke, his father had called it. It was the physical weight of a legacy that had turned into a noose. Greymont House appeared through the mist not as a grand ancestral seat, but as a tombstone. 3 stories of weathered grey stone, windows like hollow eyes, and chimneys that had long since forgotten the language of smoke. He had left this place in the wake of a tragedy that had shattered the very foundations of his identity. His brother, William, the golden son, the laughter of the house, was dead, leaving behind a mountain of gambling debts and a title that Dominic had never been groomed to wear. Dominic had spent 18 months liquidating the staff and another 4 years pretending the house didn't exist. He had come back today for one final act of cowardice, to sign the papers that would hand the keys to a surveyor and erase the Stirling name from the map of England. The carriage lurched to a halt. Dominic stepped out, his boots crunching on gravel that was now more weed than stone. He climbed the grand steps, his hand trembling as he reached for the heavy iron key. But as his fingers touched the handle, the door gave way. It was unlocked. Panic, sharp and cold, flared in his gut. Had the scavengers arrived early? Had the villagers finally come to strip the lead from the roof? He pushed the door open, the hinges screaming in a long-forgotten tongue. But instead of the smell of rot and damp, he smelled lavender and wood smoke. And then he heard it, a sound that felt like a sacrilege in a house of the dead. A child's laugh. It was a bright, bubbling sound that echoed up into the vaulted rafters of the foyer. Dominic's hand went to his belt, searching for a pistol he hadn't carried since the war, as he followed the sound toward the morning room. There, bathed in the pale light of a single candle and a small, carefully tended fire, sat a woman. She was dressed in the stark black of mourning, her hair pulled back in a soft, practical knot. Beside her, a boy of about 5 years was sprawled on a rug that Dominic remembered from his childhood, playing with a crudely carved wooden horse. "Who are you?" Dominic's voice was a ragged growl, the sound of a man who had forgotten how to speak to the living. The woman bolted upright, her face turning ashen as she pulled the boy behind the protection of her skirts. Her eyes were a piercing, defiant blue, the color of a winter sky just before the stars come out. "I am Amelia," she said, her voice trembling but her chin held high. "And this is Thomas. We meant no harm, Your Grace. We thought everyone said you were never coming back." "You are trespassing in a ducal estate. This is not a charity house. It is a private residence." "It was a graveyard," Amelia countered, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a flash of anger. "My husband died in the fever sheds of Bristol. I had a child with a cough that sounded like a death rattle, and nowhere to go. I found a loose latch, I fixed the window, I scrubbed the mold from the walls. If you want to arrest me for saving my child's life, then call the magistrate." Dominic looked at the child, who was peering out from behind his mother's dress. The child didn't look like a beggar. He looked like a king in a small patched coat. He looked like the future, something Dominic had long ago decided he didn't possess. "The surveyor arrives in 1 week," Dominic said, turning his back on the warmth of the fire. "You may stay until then, but do not think this is a home. It is a corpse, and I am here to bury it." But over the next several days, Greymont refused to die. Amelia did not hide. She moved through the house with a quiet, relentless grace. She found the hidden stores of candles, the forgotten linens in the cedar chests, and the wild herbs in the overgrown garden. Every evening a simple hot meal appeared on the heavy oak table in the dining hall, stew made from root vegetables and the last of the autumn harvest. Thomas, however, was the true invader. He followed Dominic through the dusty corridors, his small boots thudding a frantic rhythm. He asked about the portraits on the walls, about the monsters in the tapestries, and most devastatingly, he asked if Dominic was the king of the castle. "I am not a king, boy," Dominic said one afternoon while trying to organize the library. "I am a duke, and a duke is just a man with too many keys and not enough doors he wants to open." "My papa was a sailor," Thomas said, undeterred. "He said that if you have a house, you have to keep the fire going, or the stars will think nobody lives there, and they'll stop watching." Dominic looked at the child, then at the empty hearth in the library. For 6 years he had let his own fire go out. He had wanted the stars to stop watching. The tension between Dominic and Amelia reached a breaking point on the 3rd night. A storm had rolled in from the coast, a howling gale that rattled the windpane like the ghosts of the Voss family demanding entry. Dominic was in his father's old study, staring at the ledger of debts, when Amelia entered with a tray of tea. "You're selling it, aren't you?" she asked. There was no judgment in her voice, only a profound, quiet sadness. "I have to," Dominic replied, not looking up. "The debts my brother left behind, they are a mountain I cannot climb. This house is a weight. It's a reminder of a man I can never be." Walking to the window, Amelia watched the rain lash against the stone. "My husband left me with nothing but a name and a son, no land, no gold, no title, but he left me the memory of a man who fought until his last breath to keep us warm. You have a title, Dominic. You have land that stretches to the sea. You have people in the village who are starving because the great house has its eyes closed. You're not selling stone. You're selling the hope of everyone who lives under your shadow." "I never asked for the shadow." Dominic stood, his chair screeching against the floor. "I was the second son. I was meant for the cavalry, for the thrill of the charge, for a life where I didn't have to be responsible for 1,000 souls. And then William died, and I was dragged back to this rot." "Then fix it," Amelia said, turning to him. She stepped into his space, the scent of lavender and rain surrounding him. "Don't be the duke your brother was. Be the man your son sees when he looks at you." "He isn't my son," Dominic whispered, his voice breaking. "He could be," she replied. "This house could be." The morning of the surveyor's arrival was silent. The fog sat heavy on the lawn, white and suffocating. A carriage pulled up, a sleek black brougham containing a man with a quill and a cold heart. Dominic stood in the foyer, the deed to Greymont laid out on the table. The surveyor, Mr. Finch, began his assessment. "Roof is sagging. The east wing is a total loss. We'll have to tear down the stables, but the land is prime. We'll have the Sterling name cleared by spring, Your Grace." Dominic looked at the pen. He looked at the inkwell. And then he looked up. Amelia and Thomas were standing at the top of the grand stairs. They were dressed in their traveling clothes, thin, worn coats that wouldn't hold out the winter. They were ready to leave. They were ready to become ghosts again. Dominic thought of the laugh he had heard on his first night. He thought of the soup. He thought of the lavender. He realized that for the first time in 6 years, he wasn't cold. "Get out," Dominic said. Mr. Finch blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I said, get out." Dominic's voice rose, filling the foyer with a power that hadn't been heard there in a generation.
The estate is not for sale. I am the Duke of Stirling, and I will find the funds. I will cut the timber. I will drain the marshes. I will work the land if I have to. But this house is no longer a grave. It is a home." The surveyor scurried away, and a heavy, beautiful silence fell over the hall. Dominic looked up at the stairs. Thomas let out a shout and flew down the steps, throwing his arms around Dominic's legs. Amelia followed slowly, her eyes wet with tears, her hand trembling as she reached the bottom. "You stayed," Amelia whispered. "I didn't stay," Dominic said, taking her hand and pulling her to him. "I came back. For the first time, I finally came back." The restoration of Greymont was not a fairy tale, it was a war. Dominic spent the winter in mud-stained breaches, working alongside the tenant farmers he had once ignored. He sold the family diamonds to buy seed and cattle. He turned the ballroom into a grain store and the east wing into